And I'm Scott Henninger. I'm the project manager. I've got Jonathan Flint here. He's our senior associate, Wei Liu, who's urban designer, and Frank Ricks, one of our founding members. So today we're gonna go through a series of different discussion points related to the public engagement. We'll also talk about some of the future phases of this project. But first, I'm going to start with a brief recap of the second meeting. Maybe if you can go back to that slide.
Everybody close your eyes. You've seen the movie before, you're supposed to see it. So, yeah.
Okay, and then we'll talk about some of the base map progress, the big meeting work session, the website, which was a discussion point that we've had between now and the last meeting. Possible names for the project, we may actually do an interactive poll for that. And then the draft vision work session details, future phases, and homework. Next slide. So at your last meeting, we did the recap of the first kickoff meeting. We reviewed a series of base maps and talked about those. You reviewed and approved your goal statement, guiding principles, and vision. And we started to talk about the public engagement process, and now we're going to reveal a lot more about that today. Next slide. This is the goal statement. If we need to come back to these slides, we can. Next slide, guiding principles. Number 5, we had the one little tweak adding feature to it, and then the vision statement.
And thank you again to everybody for all of your feedback and your input and investment and time in that. And I know it's a lot of words and there's not a lot of pictures and maps associated with this. But I can't emphasize how important this is to get to have gotten these statements, to have gotten all of these comments and everything, the vision statement, the goals and everything outlined. Because that is the foundation to everything we do going forward. And it also is the base point to which we reference when questions arise later. Well, why did you do that? Or how did you get there? We have to have these foundation it basically documents and statements and goals and everything clearly stated to be able to refer back to these when those questions come up. So thank you again for all your help in getting to this point.
Next slide. So in your last meeting, we went through a series of base maps, and there are a few changes. What you see in red are the major changes. So we've got into the aquifer recharge zones, the soil quality. We're actually learning more about that soil quality map, and I'll talk more about that when we get to it. And we've also had conversations with some of the utility districts as well. Next slide.
Wait, before we go forward, well, we'll get there in a minute. I'll let you, Sergeant Pat, to go there.
This is the existing condition map. One of the comments that we happened to hear from a steering committee member was to add keeling. So keeling has been added to these maps. You can see over on the county line there. Next slide. The existing land use, which was based on the assessor's information, the state managed assessor's information.
Which we appreciate. This is extremely important, not only for just to know what's on the ground and treating that out, but then also for some of the future studies and analysis, which Scott will get to later. So keep this picture in mind.
Next slide. So here is your fire station, hospital, and police stations that we talked about in the last one, including one that happened to be over on the island. Next slide. Natural environment. What is different about this particular slide is that if you look on the far right bottom corner of the county, there is a hatched area down there. That is the aquifer recharge zone. So in that particular area, we may want to look out for special guidelines for infiltration, making sure water quality that is going into the ground is much cleaner. So that is recharging the Memphis aquifer.
And just something to think about too is, the Memphis aquifer, the sands being a major source for drinking water in our region. It's just to note, as we talk about this and related to other planning efforts, that Blue Oval is situated right on top of the recharge zone. Basically one of the windows into the sands.
That's right. Next slide. All right, we talked about the schools at the last meeting, middle and high schools, and as well as the college location. Next slide. Now, this particular map is our new map. It is a soil quality map, and we're still learning more about what these soils mean. And the goal is to determine which of these soils we should try to protect more, which is more conducive for development and so on. So we are reaching out and sent some emails to the University of Tennessee Agricultural Group, trying to get better definitions for this. We'll give you an update at your next meeting on what these mean. Some of these may mean that they flood a lot. They may also mean that they have issues with drainage, or that they have a lot of erosion impacts to it. So what we think we see here is that the green colors might be carrying more organic materials and maybe more conducive for farmland.
And so you might ask, well, why is this important? Because it's not just a development issue, and Scott started to allude to some of this, is that, Tipton County has some extremely productive farmland in and around the county, as many of you know. And it's even more valuable in the fact that it's situated near so many population centers, not just Memphis, but of course Covington and Brownsville, that it's at a very convenient location. It's got great transportation to those urban centers, so it's easier to get product to the market. Then we have nearby ports as well. So for those export of commodities, there's also that convenience where other counties that are a little further away from those ports that don't have as good of transportation, but might have the same soil quality, those farmlands aren't going to be as highly profitable. And so we've heard, that desire to keep some of those aspects of Tipton County, including the rural agricultural heritage that's part of Tipton County, that's a factor we're going to be considering. Well, we want to make sure that, in order to make those farms sustainable, where we have those, is to look at the soil quality, to look at the productivity of that farmland in relation to all those other factors. These are just many of the variables we'll be considering as we move forward.
Next slide. This is the street network map, including some of the arterial collectors, the I-69 corridor as well. Next slide.
Cuttings and flood in that.
Yes. And in the zoning map, this is the agricultural uses, residential uses right now, and we'll look at that as we go forward with some recommendations for the land use. Next slide. Utility district map, we talked about this a little bit last time. What we did find out since the last meeting, if you see the two islands across the river, had a conversation with several electric companies on that side, and we're able to determine that Entergy Arkansas actually serves those two islands only for power. They did say that there was well and septic over there on those islands, but they serve it for power on that side of the river. And what was interesting about it, she mentioned that there is service in Tennessee, even though they didn't know exactly where that was. This conversation actually made some of their staff aware of where that is located.
And you had Southwest Tennessee, right?
Yes.
So the portions of the county where we didn't know who the electric service provider was, basically, we've been able to fill in those gaps.
The blue color is Southwest. Next slide. So getting into the visioning work session, dates and locations, this is something we're working with Robin on to establish where these are going to actually be held. We do believe that we've established the one on April 25th at the Dyersburg State Community College location where we had our kickoff meeting. We're looking at several possible locations for churches for the other two. First would be in the west area, and we're going to zigzag across the county here. So that area might cover, let's say, Brighton, Munford, Atoka, Quito, Gilt Edge, Drummonds, and Randolph. And then we move over to the southeast area, somewhere near Mason, to pick up Charleston, Gainesville, and Keeling areas. And if some of these representatives aren't able to meet at this particular location, they're always welcome to join in one of those locations at a different meeting time as well. And then we'd be ending on April 25th at North Central near Covington at Dyersburg State. And that would cover Garland, Covington, Burleson, Mount Carmel, and Solo areas. Next slide.
And that third meeting is also
Yes, the third meeting is the open house, and we'll get into that a little bit later, with the individual agenda for those days.
So again, to mention this, so we're spreading this out geographically and by date as well to try to maximize participation.
Yes, thank you. That's our last meeting. We had a meeting with Robin and a few of the other community members from Tipton County, talked about how we might get the word out for the public outreach. So the primary focus of that meeting was the website, which we hope to have established before your next meeting. And we're going to run some names by you here shortly, and a quick poll of what that might be titled. We also talked about press releases to the Leader, which is the newspaper, talking to the radio station 93.5 about possibly an interview or at least a public announcement. Also using social media, and then making some announcements at your commission meetings, at the county commission meeting, planning commission, maybe the Chamber of Commerce as well. And those press releases may also be used for flyers. Then there's also the question of maybe putting up a banner outside these meeting locations for trying to gauge some interest before the meeting actually occurs, and to get more of the local residents to show up for those meetings.
And we did put it on here, but we're certainly not going to overlook just good old fashioned word of mouth. Get with your preacher if you can and have them say something about it on Wednesday night or Sunday morning, Sunday school, all of that stuff. Kids soccer games, sports events, school events between now and then. All of these are just good ways to get the word out. In Haywood County, I think word of mouth works just as well as any of our other outreach methods. Simply by having people like basically from the steering committee contact everybody they knew, social groups, neighborhood groups, everything, and all the ones that are already mentioned, to say, hey, you need to be here at this meeting at this time.
All right, next slide.
Is there,
Yeah.
hello?
Yes.
Just a quick thought. There are two chambers of commerce that serve our county, the South Tipton County Chamber and the Covington-Tipton County Chamber. And both of those chambers have newsletters and constant contact email distribution lists. And so I would engage Rosemary Bridges and Lauren Fletcher and just have them send out an email blast to everyone in their constant contact list for these meetings.
That's a great comment. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
that'd be a great means getting the word out.
Appreciate that. Next slide, Wayne. All right, so now we're gonna talk about what this might be called, what the website might be called, what the report might be called, and try to gauge your interest. And we're gonna open up a poll, and you can select up to 3 possible names for this poll. And I'll go through these real quick, but if you have additional suggestions, please put those in the chat box. We can talk about those as well. So the first one was Tipton Tomorrow, Tipton Next, Tipton Renewed, Tipton Inspired, Tipton Driven, Tipton Together, Tipton One, Tipton Improved, and Tipton Begins. So we're going to open up the poll here shortly, and you can choose up to 3 of these. If you only like one, choose just one.
Yeah. So here we go.
And the poll should be launched.
Yeah.
So we will use these, what your feedback is, pass that on to Robin, Tipton County. They will make a decision on what this is called. A lot of that will be based on your feedback today. Thank you.
So keep going. Yeah, we're up to 17. We've got another 10 more votes. No, 4, sorry, 3. Yeah, 3 more votes, 3 more people.
Maybe some of them are joining by default.
Oh, yeah, you're right. So that, I think that may be it.
There's 20.
We've got 20. So we're going once, going twice. All right. Yeah, let's document this. We got it documented.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Next slide, away.
And I'm glad to see the results we saw, so that's good.
It's kind of what we thought about.
Yeah.
So if you have any other suggestions, please put those in the chat box. All right, for a typical day for these visioning work sessions. We talked in the last meeting about 4 possible groups, and you see those over on the right-hand side. And we lined this up to start around 10 a.m. Likely we'd be there a little bit earlier for setup and so on. But session 1 might begin with youth education and recreation. And at 11:30, we'd have a little gap in between. And we would move into session 2, which would be general welfare and culture group. And again, these are broken out by kind of general area of the county. So if for the eastern part of the county, we're going to focus on trying to get people there from that area as well.
And so, yeah, each one of these groups is composed of a group of folks from that's area of the county.
That's right. We break for lunch and then begin again around 2 o'clock with the municipal and utility group. And then the 4th session at 3:30 with geographic interest. And we're talking about large property owners, employers, maybe tourism or historic sites, churches, whatever might be that geographic interest in that area.
Or it could be activists, right?
It could be
It could be folks that are particularly active, you know, at the neighborhood level or that area level. It could also be folks who might be interested, to Scott's point. We can figure it out. These aren't hard lines, by the way. I'm saying, you know, if somebody's particularly interested, you know, in the Hatchie preservation, we can figure out whether they go under general welfare or culture or geographic interest. But so there aren't super hard lines here, but we're generally trying to group these by these categories. And then, sorry, Scott.
So, and then we'll open up from 4:30 to 5, just in case we have some public, maybe for the first 2 meetings in particular, where we're not having an open house. Then we'll have time there to meet with individuals and take their feedback, go to the maps and talk about the process as well. And then on day 3, the meeting that would occur in the Covington area, that would begin around 5:30 with reception. Then we would have a presentation, 20-30-minute presentation. And then we would go into breakout discussions. And that's where we're going to need a lot of your help, helping manage each of those roundtable discussions, making sure that notes are being recorded, that maybe one person's not overpowering the rest of the table, and that you're getting feedback from everyone. And we'll get into training with that at your next meeting.
So before we move forward, we'd like to make sure that, you know, we're not just telling you guys what we're doing. That's not our way of doing things. We're running this past you guys to get your feedback and to make sure that this is the way that you also would like to proceed, because once again, this is your process. We're helping facilitate it. And so are there thoughts or questions here?
If there is a question, just put it in the chat box. I did see something in the chat box related to another suggestion, Tipton Envision. That might be something that if you do like that, please put that in the chat box as well.
Part of the general public engagement, just in case let some folks have just if they have any questions, that 4:30 to 5 o'clock on a typical day is that these is a reminder, these are public meetings. And so we do encourage the public to come. We're going to try to focus folks' attention, let's say, or their attendance to that day 3, to that 3rd meeting date for that open house. There's going to be a lot more information and a lot more opportunities for the general public to engage, but we don't want to close the door to anybody at any time. And so behind and kind of the background of these sessions, if somebody comes in, we're not going to say, oh, well, no, you need to come back at 4:30. We're going to have folks there on the ground that will walk them through what we're doing, explain the process and say, hey, you know, there may not be as much time or much opportunity for you to engage right now. But then we would lead them to say, hey, at 4:30 to 5 p.m., we have this other thing. And then on day, you know, then we point out that future date, the day 3 of this open house, that's where we really need you to show up. But if this is all the time you have, we'll make use of that time when we can get it to folks.
One thing to note, after all these meetings are over, we will be taking all those notes and information back with us. We'll create a summary and we'll go over that in your fifth meeting. So all that will eventually be rolled into the summary will be rolled into the report itself. So you'll be able to see pictures of some of the interaction. You'll see a summary of what came out of those meetings, what the priorities might have been, what people felt were close to them and important.
And we'll be posting those online and once the steering committee.
Yes, and we'll put that online as well. Next slide. So a typical session that, let's say the recreation youth group, these are some of the topics that we'll be discussing. So of course, we'll open up with a small introduction and talk about the planning process itself and what's driving it, like Blue Oval. It's been over 20 years since your last land use plan. And then we'll get into the goals, guiding principles, and vision established by your committee. We'll go over some of the existing conditions, including the maps that we've already talked about, a market analysis which is underway, and then begin to talk about what development scenarios might be. And we can get into that a little bit later on in our discussion on what phase 3 and phase 4 is. And I'll show you some of those ideas later. And then special considerations for each group. So there might be something that we're not thinking about for that geographic area or that particular group of people. We'd like to hear that from those individual groups. We'll give them an opportunity for more comments, questions, and then we'll talk about the next steps in the process and when they may be able to be involved again, including on the website. Next slide. So we do need your help coming up, and we're asking that you contact me and Robin about this. What we're looking for is at least 3 to 4 per each meeting. So like the youth meetings, for each session. So if you want to volunteer for the full day, that's great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If you want to just do the morning sessions or the evening session or the afternoon sessions, or just one section, whatever you can do, please let Robin know. We do encourage everyone to try to attend that third meeting, the open house, so we can have at least one person at each breakout station. We don't know exactly how many people are going to show up, but if we get 25 or 30 of you there and there's 25 or 30 tables, we've got a lot of people coming.
And it's important for you guys to be there. Again, we're facilitating this plan, but this is your plan. This is your process. And so we think it's important for you guys to be able to be there, to be seen, and to be able to engage with folks, as they have questions. With all of you there, there's a good chance that anybody that shows up will know at least one person already who's already on the steering committee. And that's comforting for those folks who show up. They're comfortable in engaging with you at least, of that individual they already know. And then going forward, you guys will be the speakers for this plan. And so it won't always be just us. We'll always be here to help, but it will be your plan. And so it's important, we believe, for you guys to be there.
It's time to talk a little bit about what some of those volunteers might be. And what we're thinking right now is maybe there'll be somebody that helps sign people in as they're coming in, give them a name tag. Maybe there's one person actually sitting at the table helping take notes. And then there might be 2 floaters, let's say, that are helping with people as they're coming in and out, and maybe just general public, walking them to the different stations where there may be a map, taking down notes that way as well, or floating to wherever they're needed. So that's some of the ideas. And then, of course, at the open house, helping with those breakout stations and just taking down notes and sending those to us as well. And we'll offer that training at the next meeting, try to deal with how you might work with a group that has one person who's kind of overpowering the rest to allow the others to speak up as well.
And just as an example, guys, I don't want this volunteer training talk to scare anybody off from volunteering, all right? You need not have ever been in front of a group before speaking. I know a lot of you guys are leaders within the community, but you need not be a leader, a vocal, high-profile person trained in this stuff. In Haywood County, most of the steering committee had never done anything like this, and they were great. And so we even have a little 1-page handout that kind of goes through this that helps people who aren't used to guiding discussions. just with quick notes, it's not nearly as difficult or as strenuous as we might make it sound with a term like volunteer training. So don't let that scare you off. It's a good opportunity to get out in front and with the community.
Next slide. So one thing I want to begin with here is your feedback in establishing your goals, guiding principles, and vision early on was very helpful in clarifying what our future phases are going to be. It actually, we believe, led to a savings for your community as well. We locked down how many meetings we think that we need, the 3 that we talked about in the open house. We will have a meeting down the road to unveil the big report later on and make some minor changes at the end of the process as well.
It also allowed us to shorten the time span. So not only were we able to reduce the cost of the future phases, but we were able to reduce the amount of time that they were going to require.
That's great. Next slide. We're going to talk about each of these phases. So phase 3, we've already talked about quite a bit. This is our public engagement process. You see on the table there that purple meeting, that is today. The next meeting that you see is the blue bar. That blue bar is our in-house training session. That will be around noon on the 29th. And then you see the aqua blue or green, whatever you want to call that, over on the right in April. So those are our visioning work sessions, and the one that says OH is our open house. Next slide.
Is that, before we go forward, let's let everybody get a look at that. So we want to make sure before we move forward that this makes sense to you guys. And what's happening? Can we explain what's happening in the background here? So this is, we're not just gonna go from today and then not do anything until, you know, the week before the week 11 there. We have some other efforts running in the background, and Scott will get to those here in a little while. But some of this is the analysis that's occurring in the background that we have to allow time for.
Good job. A couple weeks after what you see on the screen here, probably the 1st or 2nd week in May, we would have that steering committee meeting 5 with the summary. Next slide. So your deliverables for phase 3 would be those 3 visioning work sessions. We would provide the content for the website and help set all that up. We'd be doing internet-based public engagement, which might include a survey or at least a chat box or something where you're allowed to put in any feedback that you might have on the goals and principles or
We'll be
anything.
reading that a little bit, so that we don't get spam, but yeah.
Right. And then the public notices for the visioning work sessions and open house, which you can take and pin up on bulletin boards around town, including your grocery stores or churches. And then the summary, and this is an example from Haywood County that you see at the bottom. They actually had 2 or 3 pages of this public engagement, summarizing what came out of those meetings, what those priorities were, what people found was important for their community. And we'd also have photographs from those meetings.
And before we move on, I want, just going back to the, don't worry about volunteering. Everybody standing there in those pictures, well, except the guy taking the photo whose back we see. Everybody else standing, those were all steering committee members, and most of them, like I said, hadn't ever done anything like this, and it was great. They did a great job without nothing but a handout and doing nothing more than the training Scott will be doing over the course of 30 minutes here at the next meeting. And it was a very good exercise for everybody.
I believe that was one hell of a fire hall.
Yeah, and that was one that we crammed into a volunteer fire hall. They moved the fire truck out for us. And this was in July, on a hot day, on a very, very hot day. Hadn't rained in about 2 months at that point, but it was great, and it was a packed house. For it to be at the Tibbs Firehouse, for those who are familiar with it, it was the Northwest session for Haywood County. And we're not talking about a huge population on the northwest side of Haywood County, and we still had over 100 people show up to that meeting. So it was a great turnout, and the volunteers were just instrumental in making it a success.
Next slide. Now we're getting into phase 4, and some of those ideas that may be bounced off the different stakeholders in our meetings, what the development scenarios might be. So in this particular case, you saw this before from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The trend, what is it today? What is a balanced approach? And what are the places, maybe nodes or so on? And we'd be measuring that using the fiscal analysis portion Right now, we're working on that market analysis. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're gonna use a lot of this research as we're going forward to establish where we believe development will occur or should occur based on your feedback.
And then what is the character and nature of that development? What are the qualities of that development?
Next slide. This is another example from Jackson, Tennessee. They have 3 different scenarios here. The fringe growth scenario would focus more on annexation areas, maybe your growth boundary. The corridor growth scenario, which is probably more of what's happening today. Development tends to follow these corridors. Or a node scenario, so focused on specific intersections or places around your community. So we would begin to define and map all these alternate development scenarios, starting with the existing scenario, which is what the kind of the trend today. And then balancing those and measuring those with the physical impact on your community in order to develop a preferred growth strategy in phase 5. Next slide. So as we get into phase 5, we're talking about the land use plan and growth strategy itself. You may see some exhibits similar to what you see here from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The land use plan itself, maybe some of the transportation and green print frameworks, so maybe where the green belts, major green belts should be through your community. What that preferred growth strategy should be. Maybe there's some cluster development outside in some of the fringe areas where there's great farmland that should maybe be preserved, that you actually incentivize more dense development to allow the preservation of some of that farmland.
But we'll get to all of that and we will work through all of those different scenarios and the details of those that like these and many more that Scott just mentioned, those and more. We'll work through the details of that with you guys to identify what's appropriate for Tipton County. And essentially it's kind of like we'll be creating the puzzle pieces, the Lego pieces with you, the right size and color, and then we will be working on different ways to combine those. And then, of course, how many of those? How many of the blue squares do we need versus how many of the red rectangles? And that's really oversimplifying these ideas by mentioning shapes and color. But in a very basic scenario, that's kind of what we're talking about. And so that's part of this is making sure that you guys understand not just what the overall is. And it's not about us just creating these things and dropping it in your lap and saying, well, what do you think? It's about making sure that you understand the language that we're using, that we all agree to that, and that we all understand the pieces that we're talking about, that we're, as we put them together, size and type, that you understand those just as well as we do.
Yes. So on the bottom right of your screen there, you see a little bit of information from a physical impact report. And what they're measuring is some of the revenue versus what your services are going to require and your expenditures. So they're looking to find out what that sweet spot is. And using some of what your goals are, what we hear from the community, we're going to work with you to develop this and try to make it financially sustainable for your community. We'll talk about the growth principles, what you should follow, what the planning commission should follow for growth as it moves forward. The land use plan, determining what those land uses are for each piece of property, parcel across your county. There's framework plans for transportation and green print, which would be based on the outcome of your future land use. So we don't want to build that ahead of time. We want to build that knowing what the future land use plan will be.
And those will be very high level. That these will be used to inform major road plan updates, green print updates, or parks and open space updates, things like that.
And that would lead us to our report. So we would be assembling everything that we found, all this research, all the maps, all the feedback that we've obtained, strategies, all into this map or into this report. We run this by you at probably around the 60 to 65% range, again around the 80 to 90% range, making sure that we're incorporating all your feedback from the steering committee before this is unveiled to the public. The fiscal impact analysis would be included as part of the appendices of this. We'd also be working with likely a civil engineer. We've had some conversation with them about some of this transportation networks that may occur as well. And then talk about next steps and what that might be is your implementation strategies, what your priorities are. What those next steps might be, let's say, design guidelines for the county or for a certain community, maybe some small area plans, maybe updating your zoning ordinance. So just some of the things that may occur later on.
Can I mention one thing? Sure. One more thing, sorry, I'm interjecting a lot. One thing to note under the fiscal impact report, when Scott and I were joking, but laughing about this graphic actually that we put up here. It's appropriate in that it's a great summary graphic, but guys, this is the most simple part of anything that will come out of that report. They get into an incredible amount of detail in these fiscal impact analysis. And this is not them flying in and just dropping it on you guys. I think we mentioned this before. They'll be actually interviewing, I believe this consultant, should we proceed with them, will be on the ground. They'll be visiting the community and meeting with folks in various industries and categories, and basically many of you and others within the community. Not just get your information, you know, and then they go back behind the curtain and then they spit this thing out at us. They're actually looking to calibrate the variables that go into creating these reports by truthing those variables out with you on the ground and with us, with what we know to be the truth. Because sometimes the census data and this big level state reports and everything else, as we all know, misses the truth of what's actually happening on the ground. And so they'll be coming in to work with us and work with you guys to identify those variables to make sure it's accurate for your community, for Tipton County, and tailored to Tipton County. And so that's an important part of this, I believe. And it is, like I said, it's an incredible amount of information, of detail that they provide. Scott, I think, was waving this thing around.
47 pages is what we have from Osceola County, Florida. And they're looking at everything from libraries, schools, fire stations, you know, when they may occur, when you need a budget for these things. So that will be the outcome of this study.
I've got a work line in here, guys. I got a budget line in here for example, the county attorney. And when you need to hire additional county attorneys, or how much they will be involved based on population and growth at various year ends, right? At 5, 10, 25 years. Public safety, specifically animal services, for example. How much money needs to go to animal services, the pound, you know, that it's like, and when do you need to expand that pound, that animal shelter? Mobility fees, fire impact fees, parks, everything. So they really get into a great deal of detail. And they even talk, for example, you know, your general fund revenues, they split that up. Much as you would see, much as your financial subcommittees would see it, or that you have seen if you've been involved in that on the budgeting side. To help you, this can actually be used to in turn help craft those long-term financial budgets for both the municipalities and for the county as a whole.
And your capital improvement plans.
Right, yeah, specifically capital improvement plans. Yeah, it's huge for that.
Next slide. So our early consultants is underway right now with the market analysis, and this is the Chesapeake group. We're working with Howard Cohen. He is working on demand forecasting, holding capacity forecasting for your county with the existing conditions today. So he's looking at like housing demand and commercial development like demand in today's scenario, and also maybe what services might be needed right now in the current trend. Then he'll be looking at this again later on with these development scenarios to help you determine where you want to go. Next slide.
Okay. Yeah.
This is an introductory, and I know Robin knows a lot about this. We've been having conversations with Mayor Hensley in the city of Covington. Who actually is working on establishing an interim steering committee. And they're going to be playing catch up for the next month or so. They are establishing that steering committee to develop goals, guiding principles, and a vision statement for their community as well. Maybe this is a chapter that's incorporated in the overall report, or it's a standalone, but they will be working along with you. At some point, we will merge the two, probably right before the public engagement process, especially the meeting in Covington.
So this, for anybody that this might be coming, hopefully this isn't coming as a complete shock or surprise to everybody. At the beginning, way back before you began your process, you know, there was a discussion about Covington joining Tipton County. in this overall process. But the timing was such that it didn't make sense at the time. But since then, Covington, the city has contacted us, and I know that Mayor Huffman has been involved in these conversations to a degree. Where Covington does want to join Tipton County in the process. And our viewpoint is that it does make sense for Covington and Tipton County to do this together. In that, as we've talked about before, for the reason that we weren't excluding any of the municipalities in our studies and analysis, was because we can't cut the hole out of this donut. Those municipal lines, while important for taxation reasons and administration and other reasons, when you and I are driving down the road, we don't, it's not like, oh, well, we just suddenly know we're in the city and when we're in the county a lot of time, unless there's a sign there, you don't know where that municipal line falls. And so as we're seeing new growth and investment occur in the area, while infrastructure will have a large impact, they too are only somewhat cognizant of where those municipal lines fall. And so to really flesh out and vet the full vision for Tipton County as an entire, in its whole, as a community, including Covington, does help us reach that goal. Does help us craft that vision to a greater extent. It is more efficient for everybody to do this together as opposed to piecemeal. And so we're working hard with Covington to get them caught up. The thing is, you guys have already done, the Tipton County has already done a lot of this work. And so we're working to get Covington ramped up to where it does not slow Tipton down at all. It does not slow your process down, where they can join you. We don't foresee it being a full merger of the full interim steering committee on the city side with the full Tipton County steering committee that we already have in place. You guys, you're already engaged and are fully involved. We think several members from the city would join your steering committee just for that continuation. But we don't think we're gonna end up with like a 50-member steering committee here. That doesn't work out really for anybody. And so I know this is new information and we can come back and discuss this if you have questions or anything. I don't want to just gloss this over and say, okay, well then here we go. So if you have questions or want to discuss this, let's do it.
Yeah, we did hear from Mayor Hensley, and I believe he is targeting 5 of you to be on this committee. So it won't be completely disjointed. We're hoping that maybe we'll have those 5 that'll be involved. There may be another 3 to 5 that may merge in later on. But some of that committee may remain for, let's say, down the road. We've had conversations about designing government, maybe a small area plan, things like that.
Yeah, so just promoted,
for other processes.
But for your process, let's stay focused on this one for today. So questions.
If you have any questions, place them in the chat box and we can go.
Yeah, we can come back to this. Yeah, so I know this could potentially be big, but hopefully, this didn't come as a surprise to anybody.
Okay, so upcoming, we have our steering committee number 4. We're anticipating probably 2 to 2.5 hours of training. We'll get a initial findings, probably Zoom call from our market analyst. He'll go over some of what he found, what we should unveil to the individual groups in our meetings in April. And then we found out also that we have just set up that meeting for March 10th with Covington to try to get them caught up. Maybe there's a merge that occurs before meeting 4, maybe it's right after that, but hopefully before meeting 4, there's some introductions there. So just keep that in mind. And then moving into homework, and the big thing that we need from you for this particular phase is to identify stakeholder participants for these meetings.
Yep.
And to volunteer with Robin, providing the times that you're able to meet on those dates to help facilitate these meetings. So if you know people that really should be in those groups and should be part of the conversation, please send those to Robin. She's working on the list. She's working on securing those locations as well, with the 3rd bullet point there. So at the next meeting, probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll have more information on that. And at the same time, we should be setting up the website to have information provided for these meetings.
I know that we have it in here, Scott, inside for my state and for theirs. Just to remind everybody, so when we talk about identifying stakeholder participants for our small groups and for those sessions, is once again each one of the categories that Scott mentioned back earlier in the document or back earlier in the presentation.
Yeah.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4 per area per day. So per area, sorry, there we go. So it's those 4 per each one of those sessions that we'd like them to be geographically oriented to the areas mentioned earlier. And wait, you don't have to go back to that, just leave them on here. And so we are looking for those numbers. So, but each one of these groups, they shouldn't exceed 12 people. Let's say about 12 is max. 7 is good. 10, let's say 10 is a very sweet spot. Think of it as and I think we may have mentioned this in our last meeting, I can't remember. Think of it as like it's a big dinner conversation without the dinner. It's what's comfortable, it's just big enough to where one person doesn't dominate and where you get a broad range of feedback and viewpoints, but not so big that people are not comfortable speaking within the group. And so have that in mind. We're trying to keep it to those 7 to call it 12 most for each one of these groups, but there are 4. And so that's a lot of folks. So there's a lot of potential. Like Scott said, if somebody can't make it one session over in Mason, but they can make it to the session in Covington and they just really do need to be on this, we'll work with them on that. That's fine. But please send those names and suggestions to Robin. I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there because I've heard, we've been listening and we've heard from you guys that, getting some representation from youth, from those, let's say, what would we say, Scott, 20, let's call it 30 and younger, or really even younger than that, 25 and younger. Yeah, college, high school. I would go ahead and say student body presidents or student body councils, those types of things, school councils for the public education, or, for the public schools, high school. That would be a great resource, for example. Any college age kids that you know of, not that they have to be in college. Anybody who's in that 18 to 24 bracket that you know of that lives there, or even is visiting, or hey, they don't live here, but they want to come back and they're visiting for spring break. And then it happens to align with one of these dates, or something like that, or Easter, something, let us know. Like, we would love to talk to them because we do want to get their input. That's just one way to think about this as far as when you're, as far as who we get involved into these things.
Yeah, that was one of the conversation points of view that we had early on, that you want to find a way to bring these people back and establish their family there instead of moving to a larger city or out of the region.
Yeah.
Make it more attractive to them. Now, again, on March 29th, that's our next meeting. We'll do the training session. And we will talk about the early findings from that market analysis. If you have any questions, please email us. We'll open up the chat box now too.
We've got a request that we put the slides back to the proposed dates. In time for public input. Can we go back to that slide?
Yeah.
So we're gonna show those dates, the proposed dates. Well, go back to that one. Or no, where's the timeline?
You can give the timeline.
Did you have the proposed dates?
Yeah, so here on April 14th or 13th is the first day. April 13th is the west, since it's the southwest area, right in Munford, Atoka, Quito, Gilded, Drummond's, and Randolph.
And like we were noting, if somebody, by the way, from the public shows up from Mason at the 413 meeting, I'm not going to say get out. I'm going to say, yeah, come on in. Or I might say, come on in. And then I'll say, oh, by the way, we're going to be down in Mason. So if you tell all your friends and neighbors to show up to that one on the 19th, that would be great too. So we're not going to exclude anybody based on these locations and dates.
If Robin is working on those locations right now, we should have an update in the next week or two. The 15th, which is a Wednesday, southeast, and then finally in the Covington area on the 25th.
And that's the big one on the 25th.
That is a full day, and it'll have the open house in the evening. Hope to wrap up around 7:30 or so.
Mhm.
If you have any questions, add those to the chat box, but we're really appreciative of your input in the last few meetings, and we'll be looking forward to working with you as we move forward.
Well, yeah, we've dropped a lot of information on you guys today, I know. And I know we're running a little, we have a few minutes here left. And so please, questions, comments, feedback. And I'll shut up long enough to let you ask those. The other part, but before I do, if you are like me and you think about a really good question about 15 seconds after this meeting ends, please, as always, email Scott. I'll put him in front of it, Scott or me, of course, any of us, and Robin too. Please include Robin on those. Yeah, go ahead.
Scott and Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just to clarify, on that 4/25 date, that's the open house one, we'll have the typical day in addition to the open house presentation. Is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Okay,
Yes.
That's correct.
make sure.
Yeah, so that may be in the meeting room we had for our kickoff meeting. And then we move into a larger room for the open house. That may accommodate 200 or 300 people.
Yeah, guys, it's okay to go ahead and start talking to folks about these things coming up. And, just noting that, kind of stay aware and check the website to confirm days and times as we get closer to them and locations. But it's okay to go ahead and start talking about this stuff with a particular focus on the open house for the public, for the general public. We want to get as many people there as we possibly can. If we had standing room only, that would be a great thing.
Again, we did see that it was Tipton Envision was another suggestion for the name. We'll provide more information on what we heard from this and what the county has decided on in the next week or two. Send the links to that.
So either we've just overwhelmed you with information, or hopefully we've given everybody some good feedback and stuff to think about as we go toward the next meeting. Again, we have a few minutes here, so any other thoughts, questions? We're open. We're all ears. That's a good one. Okay, so Debbie, could you do you mind going into that a little bit more? In which way? I think it's fine that they have got their interim steering. Okay. Repost the dates, would you wait? Yes. While we talk about this. Yes, I think that's okay. In that they have their interim steering committee set up to catch them up with you guys. And again, some of those folks are already on your steering committee, are part of this steering committee, the folks that are in Covington. And there will be maybe a few additional more. So they're aware. And so, yeah, I don't see any, and to be honest, as we said before, a resident of Covington is as much a Tipton County resident as anybody else. And so there's I don't see any problem talking about these steering committees to other folks.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
this is Robin. I was going to jump in on a couple of those things. One, as far as talking, of course, this is all public, so we can talk, but for Mayor Hensley and Jeff are working out who's going to be on these. So, don't send out an invitation until you talk to
Right.
us. reposting the dates. I'm gonna send those dates out to everybody, so you'll get those from me. And Kathy, we'll handle all that from our office. Sean with our GIS, and he handles the website. And we'll be coordinating with LRK, the social media.
Yeah, that's right. It never hurts, folks, if you have, I'm not big on social media, but I know a lot of folks are, so your Facebook account, your Twitter account, whatever account that you might have, there's no problem with sharing, what's happening, or at least referring back or hashtagging or connecting back to the Tipton County Share. So yeah, please do get the word out. It's a great way to do it and make sure everybody's aware.
Yes, as we do get things out, please share, because we'll reach more people that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of those goals and principles may be a little bit different from what the county established. Let's say there's some areas that are underutilized in Covington itself, or areas around the square that they want to activate. They may have some guiding principles that focus more on redevelopment or infill development in those areas. So we'll work that out, and we'll also update this committee on what some of those outcomes were.
Right. We don't anticipate rewriting the count, like the goals and vision and everything else, principles that you guys have already written. We believe our thought, and we haven't discussed this, of course, with them yet, because that kickoff is on the 10th. Our thought is that those become some unique aspects, goals, vision, principles that are unique to Covington and show up in the Covington specific sections of the future land use report, where we document that. So we're going to be balancing this, and we're going to be working with you guys to balance that, but we're not looking for any one vision or goals or particular or hyper-focused local type stuff to override any of the other countywide vision and goals. And being privy to the current committee leaders, we are not aware of the leaders yet, right, Scott?
No,
I think they're still putting that together, Debbie.
I think they're making final decisions now. We'll probably have it before our meeting on Friday, but
Certainly we will. I'm fully confident we'll have that list before we go into that meeting.
that's right. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
Those are good questions. And Debbie, that is one of the things, just as I'm seeing these questions, not just Debbie, I know, because I'm sure it's a lot. There are several folks that are thinking along these lines. We don't want to just force you guys together. We're not just going to drop you in together and say, oh, well, you got to get along. Let's go. We got to keep running. We're going to work with you guys on pulling the steering committees together. And we appreciate your patience on that too, on patience, and any questions and comments, feedback you have on that, please let us and Debbie know, or not Debbie, sorry, Robin know. Any other questions or comments, and those lines, and we'll work through that with you guys. But we do think that everybody together, that Covington and Tipton County working together on this will produce a better result. We'll create a better land use plan for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you guys. We appreciate your time today.
We'll be in touch soon.